Well, as Heather said, the month of November is known for Thanksgiving, and it's a celebration of the fruits of the harvest. And so lessons from the land seem like an appropriate theme for the month. Because there is so much that we can learn if we observe the land, the plants, the creatures that are part of it, and the seasons as they each bring their own special time for growing and sowing and harvesting and laying fallow. And Shakespeare wrote about it in As You Like It to the Duke, exiled from the palace court into the woods, tells those few gathered around him, and this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. I would not change it. Love that. I just love that. Because there are sermons in stones if we choose to listen. And the forest where he was living, where Duke was living, has now become his teacher, providing valuable lessons that equip him to face the adversity that that has come to him, to face it not with fear and not as a victim, but with a sense of adventure. My topic today is the law of the farm, and author Stephen Covey touches on this in his highly acclaimed book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he goes into a bit more depth in First Things First. And the first things that Mr. Covey is talking about are the principles that undergird our values, our behaviors, and our beliefs. And he believes that there are universal true north principles that are part of every culture. I mean, they just run. This theme runs through every single culture, and they're identical. And you and I are truly fulfilled then when we look for and make the effort to live congruently with these principles. And he's comparing the basis of all of this with the law of the farm and the law of the school, he calls it. And in his own words, he says, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I crammed my way through undergraduate school thinking I was really clever and learned to psych out the system, to figure out what the teacher wanted. How does she grade? Mostly on lectures? Great, I don't have to read the book. What about this other class? Oh, we have to read the book? Okay, where are the cliff notes so I can get a quick summary? I wanted the grade, but I didn't want to quit my lifestyle. Then I got into graduate work, a different league altogether. I spent my first 3 months trying to cram to make up for 4 years of undergraduate cramming, and I wound up in the hospital with ulcerated colitis. I was trying to force the natural processes, and I found out that long-term, you simply cannot do it. I spent years trying to compensate for the foolishness of getting myself into a value system that was not tied to principles at all. So you know that cramming and cutting corners may achieve short-term goals, like having party time. But while we can get through school that way, we don't get the education that we could have had we followed the law of the farm. Because those are the principles that must be followed if we're going to have a good harvest. There's no cramming. There's no way a farmer can run out at the last minute, plant seeds, and expect to reap crops the next day. Dr. Sidney Bremer observed this in his book, Spirit of Apollo. He says, nature is evenly balanced. We cannot disturb her equilibrium, for we know that the law of cause and effect is the unerring and inexorable law of nature. But we do fail to find our own equilibrium as nations and as individuals because we have not yet learned that the same law works inexorably in human life and in society as it does in nature, that what we sow, we must inevitably reap. This morning, early, I watched a video of a potato farmer, and he said it took 3 to 4 years just to prepare the land before he could plant his potatoes. And then after that, everything that he did to get a good crop was to follow the natural laws of nature and work in accord with them. And he said technology, while it's valuable, can't hold a candle to knowing the law of the farm and working in congruence with those principles. So you and I can easily see how the law of cause and effect would work for a farmer. Obviously, you've got to do things right in order to get a result of a crop. But the law of cause and effect is at work each day, each minute, for each one of us. And that's why understanding the true north principles are important. Because as we encompass them in our daily life, then they become the touchstones for the choices that we make. And then those choices then, made from those principles, are in harmony with the natural laws of the universe. The law of cause and effect, the law of the farm. And we reap the choices by having a life that matters. Stephen Covey chanced upon a book which contained what he said was the most powerful and significant statement he had ever read. And I know we've done this before, but I love this statement. It says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And he said, when he came upon that phrase, he said, the idea hit me with incredible force. It had a powerful effect on the paradigm of my life. I began to discover in that space my own ability to make a consciously chosen response. And then he goes on to say that there are endowments that reside in this space. There is the endowment of self-awareness, of conscience, of creative imagination, and independent will that create our ultimate human freedom, and they create the compass that empowers us to align with true north. So in our teaching, in the Science of Mind, we talk about the attributes of God. And as expressions, offsprings of God, we were born with these inherent attributes. This is what we believe, the attributes of love, truth, beauty, joy, harmony, peace, abundance. You've heard me say these a gazillion times. And those are the absolutes that make up who we are. But how many of us grew up with that concept? You know, more often than not, if we believed in those attributes at all, we thought that they were out there somewhere. And if we worked hard enough, we could acquire them, maybe. We were never told that all we had to do was look inside. Reverend Chris Michaels, in Your Soul's Assignment, tells us, your power is internal. It comes from the life of God within you, seeking expressions as you. There's no external power source in your life except what you have chosen to give your power to. No one has power over you. You have complete power over the quality of your life experience because you are the only person choosing how to act and react to any given circumstance. Your power lies in that choice between what happens to you, the stimulus, and what you decide to do about it, response, is where your power lies. And I believe that the endowments that Stephen Covey talked about are really those things that align with true north. I believe that there are these are the ways that we can bring our God-given attributes into the world. So those times that we are at choice point, if we consciously move into that space between stimulus and response. When I was a little girl, my mother told me count to 10, before you made it. So that kind of a gap between stimulus and response. Then we give ourselves time to touch that inner wisdom, and our response then will be in accord with the attributes that we inherently have. Deepak Chopra calls this space the gap. And he says the gap is your connection to the field of pure potentiality. It is that state of pure awareness, that silent space between thoughts, that inner stillness that connects you to true power. So the endowments that reside in this space, self-awareness, conscience, creative imagination, and independent will, create our ultimate human freedom, the power to choose, to respond, to change, so that we are really living by true north. And we've gone over these before in past years, but I want to do it again. I don't. Some of these things are timeless, you know. So let's begin with self-awareness, which is our capacity to stand apart from ourselves and examine our thinking, our motives, our history, our scripts, our basic belief systems, and our actions and tendencies that stem from these things. You know, so much of the time we are responding to the universe, to the actions in habitual ways, many of them that we inherited in infancy. And we don't question these beliefs to see if they truly still hold meaning for us. You know, are they serving us now? I mean, maybe they served us back then, but are they serving us today? You know, when I was a little girl, my mother was extremely critical. And I grew up believing that I could never live up to her expectations. So I've done a lot of work on this, but even today, when someone is critical of me, I sometimes recoil in defense, you know, rather than seeing the constructive message that is being given. And I recognize, if I can go into that gap, I recognize that I am responding to my mother, not to the person in front of me. Yet when I can step back and take a moment in the gap to be aware that this is my tendency, then I can choose to listen with love, to respond in love, and grow through that experience. I can ask myself, do I own it? You know, is this person criticizing me? Is this something that I own? And if I do, then I can do something about it. But you can't ask if you own it if you're fighting it. Stephen Covey suggests that a good way to get in touch with some of these hidden belief systems is to keep a journal. So if we don't like the way something is going in our lives, to journal about it, write about it, and consider what inner beliefs are contributing to that discomfort. Meditation can do this as well. As we sit in the silence, we are actually sitting in the gap. We allow ourselves to align with those God aspects within us and to know that we are God expressing on a human level and that our inherent nature is loving, is peaceful, is harmonious. And sometimes if I'm struggling with something, you know, in prayer or meditation, I have a mantra. It was given to me by a teacher of mine, old-time Science of Mind minister, many years ago. His name was Dr. Oren Moen, and he was the head of the Department of Education when I was at Founders. Wonderful man. He had a cackle that you could hear across the parking lot. I always knew where he was. But what he said was, whatever, when you're in a situation you don't want to do, whatever I need to know or do is being revealed to me lovingly, gently, kindly, and in a manner that is crystal clear to me. So that way, if there's something in my thinking that's clogging my belief system, that I'm not experiencing what I want to experience, I've opened an avenue for that spirit guidance to show me where I've been in error and how to proceed with a new awareness. So both meditation and journaling expand that gap between stimulus and response, giving time for those true north principles to surface. The second endowment is conscience. The Latin root for this word conscience is conscientia, which means knowledge within oneself. Inner wisdom. So our modern definition is a person's moral sense of right and wrong. But I think that definition is confusing. Because if we believe that morally we should not tell a lie, what would we do if, living in Nazi Germany, an SS sergeant asked us, do you know anyone harboring Jews? And if we did, would we be truthful? Or is there something deeper than that moral code of truthfulness? So if we use our conscience as a way to touch our innate inner wisdom, then we are guided by those higher principles, and we will automatically know exactly what to do, even if it means giving up a championship. Because I read this morning about Jacqueline Kiplimo, who is one of Kenya's best athletes. And in September of 2010, I mean, she has more medals than just about anybody, but in September of 2010, during the International Marathon in China, she happened upon a male runner who was suffering from dehydration mid-race. This particular runner had no arms below the elbows and didn't have the ability to grab the water bottles being handed out. This was only at the 6-mile mark of the marathon, but she would accompany him for the next 17 miles, holding water bottles for him until she felt he could finish under his own power. This act of selflessness ultimately cost her the race. She came in second, and the $10,000 prize. But the newspaper articles heralded her as a heroine, and she herself said that she had absolutely no regrets about her decision to help that runner. The third endowment is creative imagination. And Stephen Covey says that imagination is our ability to envision, to see the potential, to create with our minds what we cannot at present see with our eyes. And you and I all know, if you've been here any length of time, we all know the value of affirmations, of treasure mapping, of visualizing, of visioning, to create in our mind a positive outcome, accomplishment, or goal. And they're all really super tools. But the challenge is, are we in our imagination creating something from our ego space that when we finally manifest it, we say, oops, that isn't what I really wanted. So as Stephen says, have we painstakingly climbed the ladder of success rung by rung, only to discover as we reach the top rung that our ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. So you know here that we use visioning to determine our true north principles as a center. We have our overarching spiritual vision that's on the back of our program. It's our sacred covenant. We have one for each of our 13 ministries, and we take time at the end of each year to create a vision for the following year, and that's the one that's on the front of your program right now. So these vision statements and spiritual intentions are not about what we want to accomplish. Rather, they are a way of being in the world, both as individuals and as a center. And Gail's going to talk to us a little bit about Warm from the Heart Jacket Project, which we've been involved in for the last 3 years, and which was Gail's inspiration and idea, to see how, let you know how we did this year. But that's just one of those spiritual visions that have come to manifest as a beneficial presence, as something good in the world. A spiritual vision born of creative imagination is the vehicle through which we may share ourselves, how we can be in loving service to each other, to the community in which we live, and to the world. Our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, says we are at liberty to choose what manner of life we shall live, how we can be in loving service to each other, to the community in which we live, and to the world. I just read that. Let me start over. Our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, says, we are at liberty to choose what manner of life we shall live. We should feel that in this choice, we are backed by all the will, all the purpose, and all the law in the universe. Our reliance is on this law and order. It is the creative agency of all life, and at the same time, our use of it is personal and individual. Here is all the freedom one could ask for, and all the freedom that the divine mind itself could possibly have given us. The freedom to act as an individual, the freedom to give full rein to our creative imagination. So when we align our thinking with true north principles, or the attributes of God, then our creative imagination starts the process of a happy and fulfilling life, because that is what we have creatively imagined. And the final one is independent will. And that's according to Stephen, that's our capacity to act from our true north principles rather than reacting from our ego. He says the human will is an amazing thing. Time after time it has triumphed against unbelievable odds. The Helen Kellers of this world give dramatic evidence of the value, the power of independent will. But as we examine this endowment in the context of effective self-management, we realize it's usually not the dramatic, the visible, the once-in-a-lifetime up-by-the-bootstraps effort that brings enduring success. Empowerment comes from learning how to use this great endowment in the decisions we make every day. The degree to which we've developed our independent will in our everyday lives is measured by our personal integrity, and integrity is fundamentally the value that we place on ourselves. It's our ability to make and keep commitments to ourselves, to others. It's our ability to walk our talk. And I believe that this deep use of independent will that causes us to touch our God-given attributes is a result of living from those other endowments of self-awareness, conscious, and creative imagination. Because it's kind of like these are the precursors to actually stepping out into action. So independent will then does not give in to short-term goals or the impulse of the moment, but is centered in those principles that guide our deepest value and give meaning and context to our goals, our schedules, our interactions with others, and to every facet of our lives. And I believe that as human beings having a spiritual experience here, that we are engaged by Spirit to be its expression. And I believe that as we embody these endowments as a way of being in this world, we can do more to change the world than we will ever know. Thank you. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you.